Howdy, I'm Quinn, back once again, slowly starting to dress up a little bit more because you people in the Twitch chat are generally relentless about cyberbullying me into dressing better than I already have been. I'm devolving with the whole hair thing, the clothing thing, but it's the first night of Hanukkah, so I get to dress up. I'm joined today by one of the nicest people in all of AWS community, Mark Nunnikhoven. Mark, you're a VP of research at Trend Micro, which I feel is just their way of being as nice to you as you are to the rest of us. Welcome.
Thank you. That's a very, very kind, Corey. I'm really happy to be here. I think this is going to be a blast.
So before we dive into the whole keynote nonsense, I want to talk, well, about a few things. First, you wound up giving a talk that I live tweeted most of, and despite the fact that it was a sponsored talk on the sponsor track for a sponsor expo that AWS is utterly failing to promote, it was really good. My question is that you are very clearly that guy on the Zoom call at work, by which I mean you're the streamer with the lights and the acoustic paneling and the attractive backdrop and the rest. And your entire talk that you gave for AWS looked like you were talking about giving the talk while simultaneously having your driver's license photo taken. White background, directly on front. The content was wonderful. Someone in the Twitch chat said that your talk was excellent because it was. It wasn't a sales piece. It was legitimate. It was heartfelt. But what the hell was going on with the AV quality compared to your normal ridiculous standards?
Thank you. I appreciate all of that. That's very, very generous. Yeah, so I was not super happy with the AV quality that came out in that talk. That was actually V2 of 3. I recorded a whole nother version. The first one was what I kind of wanted with what you would expect if you ever follow me on YouTube. You know, I crafted it like a video I would do. Whereas I kind of got like the hand slapped and said, you know, told to follow along with everyone else, because if you have noticed, everybody's video looks the same for reInvent. So the idea was uniformity, which I can kind of understand from a conference perspective. You want to make sure that everyone's kind of on equal footing. Personally, though, I think that also strips out a lot of the personality and a lot of the emotion. As you know, you do a ton of fantastic video work. It's really hard to get that emotion and connection across. And when you remove all aspect of personality, it's even harder. So I appreciate the positive feedback because, you know, for me, that means I've overcome the, you know, I'm coming to you from a void, but not in a fun way like John Oliver from last week tonight.
I found that what you say absolutely resonates. I gave a talk at Reinforce last year, back when, you know, going places in person was a thing to do, and it was part of a leadership track. And my slides were on my own slide template, which looks vaguely similar to what we see right now on this live stream. And it was my own slide deck brand. And slide review at AWS, well, they have opinions and they have standards. And their response was, we want this to be on AWS branded material. And my response was, well, let's go through a brief run through of what I'm going to talk about. And I think you'll agree with me that you want there to be zero confusion that I do not work for Asian, that I do not. And they went for, oh, the skeptical, yeah, whatever, let's look at this too. Oh, does content get approved? Yeah, we don't want this on our slide deck. Bingo. The trick is to be obnoxious enough that you get your way. That's my entire life philosophy.
Yeah, I get it. And, you know, it works for you. You've got the confidence to pull that off. I am far more, you know, stereotypical Canadian, where I kind of go, oh, okay, sure. You know, and I mean, objectively, I get the desire here and the drive. A lot of people aren't comfortable. You can see that in a lot of speakers at reInvent are reading off scripts. Right? And they're not super comfortable presenting on camera, and it's a skill, right? It's something you need to practice. It's something not everyone's comfortable with, but I really like for seasoned presenters like yourself to give them that ability to kind of go beyond, because, you know, I've seen you speak live. I've seen you improv live for a crazy amount of time. And, you know, I don't think anybody in the audience realized that it was improv. You know, you're that good. And so, yeah, you know, allowing you to go outside the bounds, I think, is important. And then there's that aspect of like, let's disconnect Corey and what he says from the actual brand. You know, but it's everybody's trying their best.
Okay, but let's talk a little bit about what the keynote covered today. But first, I want to thank our sponsor, because yes, it does cost money to do things like this, and they help defray those costs and indulge my ongoing love affair with the sound of my own voice, Turbot. Turbot's interesting in that they do a lot of management and governance automation, you know, the things we wish AWS did, but they don't. And the honest reality today is that there is a tremendous place for tools to make that better. And Turbot is frankly one of the best. I was skeptical, as I always am, about tools like this until I kicked the tires a bit when they reached out to sponsor. And oh, this is unfortunate. I actually like the product. I can't just read a slide. I actually have to say something positive about it that I mean. Great, because they are fantastic. They specialize in the open source tool. The open source tools don't. Organizations with a lot of accounts, with a lot of things going, things that work on the open source projects that, I'll iterate through all 20 of your instances. It sort of breaks down when you start getting at massive scale. Turbot gets it right in a way that an awful lot of other things don't. They provide context around things that they tell you. You can turn things on and off from auditing and governance sake, but also just because it's the right thing to do. It doesn't prevent bill shocks, but it goes a long way towards avoiding making them worse than they would have otherwise been. Check them out at turbot.com/Corey, as you'll see on the bottom of the screen. Make sure you spell Corey correctly, or it makes me personally upset. Now, Mark, what did you think? As I look back at the Peter DeSantis infrastructure keynotes, I love them, because it feels like it's the one day a year that they let Peter DeSantis out of the data center. And the first thing he does is he runs to the bathroom, because my God. And then he gets on stage and is able for one magical night to visit all the cloud customers of the world and deliver us presents and talk about what goes on before they stuff him back into the data center cage, presumably with tasers mounted on shock pikes. So what do you think?
I agree in that. I love Peter's presentations, either the Monday night or the Tuesday night live, but I gotta be honest, and this may shock you, I was actually a little disappointed with today. I love normally when they go super deep into really weird minutia, and while they went a little bit deeper than normal and kind of revealed some of the stuff behind the scenes, I don't think they went nearly far enough, especially considering there was no announcements at all in the keynote.
Well, Jeff Barr, or his impersonator, hard to tell, it's Twitch, mentions that RDCs have bathrooms. Incidentally, this is how you wind up sneaking NDA'd information into the public eye. You say something preposterous, and they start building out this picture, bits and pieces. So on my master plan of what AWS really looks like on the inside, I can now add there are, in fact, bathrooms in the data centers. Piece by piece, brick by brick, we're building a bit of a story. And yes and no. I would say that there were announcements, but there weren't service or feature announcements. I think that's probably a fair estimation. They talked a lot more about sustainability than they have in other contexts. They had some things they talked about there. I didn't realize until this talk, I don't know if it's been disclosed before, but they build their own custom UPSs. That's kind of fascinating. And I'm watching that, and I'm simultaneously impressed by what it takes to engineer at that scale, and cringing, because some rando company out there is watching this, and they're some like $50 million a year company, and we're going to build our own UPSs for our data centers, and it's just, you are missing the point completely.
Yeah, and so they haven't talked about the UPSs before. A couple years ago, we got insight into them rewriting generator firmware because in that case, the generator failover was too cautious, so it was too safe for them, and they'd rather burn out a generator than actually lose power, which makes sense at their scale. But I 100% agree with you. In my tweet storm, just like you had a tweet storm for the keynote, repeatedly I was saying, at this scale, this is super cool. At this scale, this makes sense. So, for them, I loved how Peter had presented the UPS problem as a metric of his sleep level and how well he's going to sleep at night, because, being in an infrastructure role, being in operations, it's always about, what keeps you up at night. And the UPS thing was interesting because they're bucking that trend that's in the industry right now, which is essentially, okay, let's get away from individual UPSs to one massive UPS that will cover your entire data center. And they actually showed a picture of it in the keynote. And they've gone the exact opposite, is we're going to put multiple mini UPSs within one rack in order to be more efficient, but more importantly, reduce that blast radius, so that if anything actually goes wrong, there's multiple redundancies within that rack. But if that rack goes offline, it's just that rack. It's not the entire data center. So it was really fascinating and interesting. But again, it's only for people at that scale. Unless you're just nerding out, having fun, building your own UPS for the heck of it, there's no business reason ever, unless you're one of the big three, to actually go out and do this.
Right. Sure, maybe if you're Facebook, if you can spare time to build your own custom hardware in between committing various atrocities, it makes sense. But for the rest of us, it doesn't make sense. It's just not where the value is anymore. I do think that things that they alluded to are relevant to customers. One of the things that I'm actually encouraged to see them talking about more is the difference between availability zones between providers.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, oh, we're being more specific. No, they're not. They're not being anywhere near specific enough. I want to know exactly how far apart are two availability zones at any given point in time. Is there a commitment, a number that I can fall back on? Because the wording that they give, while encouraging, is not going to pass muster with auditors who are looking to break out a tape measure in some cases, or insurance requirements. The problem is that because everyone uses the term availability zone or something close to it, it means different things. For some providers, it's we slapped a couple of racks in place and called it good. One of the more interesting things is Oracle's dedicated region, which is they will build a whole region inside of a customer facility. And on the one hand, that's super neat, where you can have complete compatibility between services, and super terrifying because I spent a lot of time consulting in large enterprise companies over the years before I got into doing the whole cost thing. And the way these people run data centers is terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah, and the Oracle Cloud thing I think is interesting because it's essentially a slightly beefed up AWS Outposts, which is interesting from a business reason of trying to get people using those interfaces you want them to eventually migrate to. Not so much we're going to add a region for availability and reliability. But I think it's really interesting your point about the auditing around the specifics of an availability zone. So Peter had used the term Goldilocks zone, and he was talking about latency versus the risk of different events happening. So power outage, natural disaster, and he got to the ridiculous of like meteor strike and extinction level events and things, which aren't that ridiculous. Being a security guy, I've seen people actually put that in a threat risk assessment, which there's being thorough and there's being absurd. But what I'm really curious about is if the new AWS Audit Academy is actually going to address some of those specifics. Because you mentioned that as a very clear example, is if an auditor has a requirement to know just how far those data centers are, how does AWS handle that? Traditionally, they've just kind of gone a hand wavy and said, it's far enough for my definition of enough, not yours, you don't get to know. But that clarity, I'm not sure if it's useful in everyday context. I think the key takeaway from this segment from Peter today was really, look, we've thought this stuff through. We've added multiple redundancies. We've built for resiliency. We've built for reduced blast radius. You can trust us. You can build on us. Now, trust but verify is the security mantra, but it's still good for them to be talking about these things out in the open.
Oh, yeah, it's fantastic talking to finance companies, particularly hedge funds, when they get into the whole business continuity planning. Because as engineers, we love to talk about 5 nines of durability and the rest. And before you get anywhere close to that, you will see the hedge fund dividing up a map of the United States into, in the event of a civil war, here is the likely sides and which states are there. We want to make sure we have redundancy across both zones. And it is bizarre, freaky, and yeah, when I talk about things, I'm talking about computers going down, not the complete destruction of American society. Yeah, I'm not going to sleep well tonight. But you're right. The entire point of that keynote fundamentally was to help us sleep well at night because they're taking care of these things so that we as customers generally don't have to.
Yeah, and there are some interesting business. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I was just going to say to close that segment.
No, please. There's a slight bit of latency. It's fine. Continue.
Okay, which is actually the topic I wanted to talk about. Was Peter brought up latency, and I think that for far more customers is actually a requirement and of interest than the risk side of it. Specifically in the finance area, I've talked to organizations in fintech who are willing to spend millions and millions of dollars to reduce latency by 10 milliseconds or a few milliseconds, simply because that means faster trading, that means faster transactions, which is direct dollar to them. So I think, to wrap this availability zone issue around, it's not so much risk, it's more performance based. And he touched on that lightly, but not nearly as much, because I think that's far more applicable to everybody.
Absolutely it is. Even folks who don't actually need to care about latency. Like, I don't really care in how many milliseconds a cat picture loads, as long as it's within some established tolerance. Once we get into tens of seconds, I start to wonder if that cat's really worth looking at. Spoiler, it is. Let's talk about something that we dabbled about folks who delude themselves into thinking that they can run a full hyperscale cloud environment just as well as one of the big players are. But, oh, Jeff Barr chimes in, is the cat there or not? Not at the moment, but that doesn't mean that it's not here, merely that we're not observing it. I accidentally tried to collapse a waveform and instead collapse some boxes onto a cat. We'll see if it digs out from there. I've also have it on good authority that cat is in fact a chihuahua, but I've never been particularly good with animals. Now, speaking of companies that are doing things that they should not be doing, like building your own data center to compete with a hyperscaler, they take it a step further, and they're doing a lot of stuff that they're very proud of with their custom silicon. Specifically, their acquisition of Annapurna Labs, which is apparently getting to keep its name, which is a bit of a rarity for an AWS acquisition. And they're building all kinds of interesting stuff. They talked about this being the 4th generation of Nitro, for example.
Yeah, I was surprised and happy that we're at V4 of Nitro already. And this isn't to be confused with Nitro Enclaves, which is a subset, and there's a real security need for that kind of thing, and it's fascinating for security nerds and nobody else. But Nitro itself enables things to connect to the AWS cloud. So what got the most traction, I think, was when Peter actually pulled up a picture that totally was just bizarre, but makes sense in context, of a Mac Mini shoved into a half rack unit. And apparently Thunderbolt connected into a Nitro custom controller, and that's how it becomes, AWSified, is through this custom silicone, and that's really that special sauce that's letting them provide these dedicated and different hardware offerings, and it enables a lot of wonderful isolation while still giving them the flexibility in the networking and storage and compute backends. It's a huge differentiator, and you've got to wonder in the other hyperscalers, how close are they to something like that, or how are they solving that problem? Because I haven't seen any data or information from them about that type of challenge.
Yeah, it feels like it's not something that other folks are seriously exploring. I have, to my understanding, at least I think, that they're not making any changes to the Mac Mini hardware itself. They are installing whatever the heck software they're doing. Nitro's doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and everything instead winds up getting plugged into a bunch of things that then gets offloaded to the box. These are effectively stock Mac Minis unloaded off of a truck, packed into these sleds, and then shoved into a bunch of racks. That's a really neat approach, and it is a unfortunate parallel to what we do with Mac Mini to wind up stuffing them into office closets and whatnot, only they've done it at scale and they've started making it available to us. I don't like the pricing yet, but I think it's going to unpack an awful lot for enterprises who have audit requirements, security requirements. If you want to use this as your Mac desktop in the cloud, don't do that. It is hilariously overpriced for that. That's not what it's for. But for entire engineering teams trying to not have to carve out exceptions anymore for the Mac build process and lying about it to their auditors, this is huge. It's transformative. Please go ahead and use it. That's who it's for. And I'm going to keep a close eye on what comes next, because what we really want it to be is an Amazon workspace running Mac OS. I think that is sort of the ultimate goal an awful lot of us are hoping for. Then we can travel on the road with whatever we want and get back to our desktop somewhere that's hard to spill coffee into it.
Yeah, and that would be very... Yeah, you could try. And that's really interesting because they mentioned in the session about the Mac OS instances is that, the M1 enabled Mac Minis will be available sometime in the new year, which supports that whole, it's the stock, just plug it in, right? But then the other thing is you think of how it's connected. So if it's using a Thunderbolt 3, which is USB 4, which all connects through only a particular type of cable, like it's a nightmare on that aspect. But a Thunderbolt connection, modern Thunderbolt connection to the Nitro controller means they've got 40 plus gig per second to play around with, which is why, just like any other EC2 instance, you can add multiple ENIs to it. You get that security group boundary. You get quick access into the AWS backbone. Like, this isn't just a Mac Mini. It's a Mac Mini that they then supercharged via Nitro into the AWS cloud, which, all the examples you mentioned, is really going to tax out and scale, sort of maximize the usage of those. Whereas when I talk to customers who are doing, multiple mobile OS deployments or development labs, they've got a stack of minis on a shelf somewhere, and they're used maybe 2 to 3% of the time just because of the connections to them, the management there. Offloading all that into Nitro and giving you an AWS native environment and interface into it, it's going to be, despite the cost, it's going to be worth it for these teams because it's going to save them time, right?
Oh yeah, everyone talks about the management ability of getting IAM bolted into this, the VPC security posture, all the rest. But someone asked in the chat, they can do EBS on them. And yes, I want to talk about that for a minute because there's a misunderstanding about what EBS is. People think it's just a pile of disk volumes that you can plug into systems. No, well, yes, but it's magic. It's magic in that a disk gets lost. You will notice it if you're looking very closely as a very short, very almost imperceptible latency spike, and life goes on. It can be snapshotted. It can be moved around in other places. You can change the performance characteristics without rebuilding it. Oh, I want it to be in a super fast I/O provision volume today. Great. Now I want it to be just a big, slow mechanical spinning rust disk because I want it to be as cheap as possible. Great. The same volume can change without downtime. The fact that you can just plug these things in on the fly without rebooting things, for example, is huge. It's a capability story that I don't think that, to be direct, most of the Mac ecosystem has explored because until now they really couldn't.
Yeah, and I mean, Apple over the years has dabbled with Xserve and a bunch of, sort of enterprisey things and never really stuck with it. So Mac OS users have always been reliant on third-party solutions, and they're mainly targeting media workflows. So we're talking primarily direct attached storage, which is fine if you're got three people in the same physical area. So this is really going to level that up because, yeah, EBS, I think it was last year's, so 2019 or 2018 Werner's keynote had a breakdown of what EBS is doing under the covers, and your explanation starts to get at it, but the slide Werner had was amazing. It was just this crazy huge interlocking mesh of different nodes as to where your data was actually being pulled from to deliver those things like the almost no latency on a resize, on a backup, and then we just saw last week increases in EBS speed made available, right? So they've quadrupled the speed limit, giving us bigger sizes. It is absolutely fantastic what they've done under the covers, and the beauty is none of us really know or care. It just works. So now that you can get that on your Mac, is going to be pretty crazy.
I'm looking forward to seeing how this continues to evolve. Everyone likes to look at a day one AWS service and point out, oh, that's why it's crappy. That's going to make it suck. That's why I'm never going to use it. But it's hard pressed to find anything that started off crappy and didn't get worse. Normally I come up with some snide example here, except I really can't. Everything that they've launched has gotten progressively better with time. As much as I love being a cynical, snide bastard, I just can't come up with a good example of anything that hasn't materially improved. Sure, some have a long way to go, but but everything gets better. I'm looking forward to seeing how this evolves over time.
I got one for you.
Oh,
not that it got worse, but it stayed the same. SimpleDB. You mentioned it in one of your newsletters.
SimpleDB is the one folks go to. Yeah. And two things are true about SimpleDB. What I love is there are two things. One is that SimpleDB is still available and they are actively hiring for the SimpleDB team from time to time. Two, Andy Jassy has gone on record in a press interview referring to it as a failed product, but they still make it available to customers. How the hell does morale work on that team is really my open question. But okay, if customers use it, absolutely AWS will continue to support it. And to be fair, SimpleDB is one of the canaries I have out there. Once you start seeing them turn SimpleDB off, okay, that's going to be a question of, is this starting to turn into a bit of Google? I would argue to some extent AWS goes a bit too far. There are things I would love to see them deprecate, but I understand why they don't. But it gets challenging at times, disambiguating between all the different competing offerings with one another. It's a separate argument.
For sure, but related, one thing that I'd always love to call out as a really good example of their operations, because you said I was positive, and I'll continue to be positive here, is when they do make what would be fundamentally a breaking change, there's plenty of communications and plenty of time ahead of it, right? So when they increased the EC2 instance ID size, right? A lot of people had hard-coded limits in their databases for some reason. They were counting on specific sizes. We got, 6 to 12 months heads up that was coming. And that's a really, really positive thing, but back to your point that kicked this off was, yes, these services continue to get better. We know the Mac Mini is getting better in the new year when they add the M1s, right? The M1s are far more powerful than the existing Intels. And every service, I think it was one of the databases, it was Redshift, I think, that shipped 250 features this year. Security services shipped another 200. I mean, now features and services are blurring the line, what's what. But
if
there
I
is
see
this
your
constant
feature as a
improvement.
top-level offering in the AWS console, it's not a feature, it's a problem.
Yeah, and there's the challenge of trying to explain it to people, but there is this constant improvement. My biggest gripe, if anything, is that when stuff gets launched on day one, it's obviously built for a use case, and that specific use case isn't necessarily as well articulated as it should be. I would much rather a more frank approach of like, hey, we built this for Corey and Corey's use case. If you're Mark, you're on our roadmap, but you're not there yet. Give it a little time.
Yeah, and sometimes the only way to figure that out is by reading the tea leaves or the pricing page. Tea leaves are more legible sometimes. I was super excited about Amazon Kendra. Like, it ties together, searching all these different things where my data. This is great.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's $7,500 a month. Oh, it's not for Corey. I can hire a full-time librarian instead. It's absolutely valuable to understand. Is this for you? Is it not? And sometimes it goes too far in the other direction. How many amazing services live under the IoT umbrella that are fantastic in the serverless world or building SaaS, but because it says IoT on the top, it's, oh, that IoT means not for me until my house is overtaken by robots. It's a problem of how do you surface the amazing services that are great for a use case to that person without it getting drowned out by the cacophony of everything that's tied into it.
Yeah, and so I actually watched 2 sessions this morning that was exactly this problem. There was one on AWS Glue Data Brew, because apparently services names need to rhyme now. And then
is
I watched
AWS
one right after that.
Data Brew a service for you and me too, or not so much?
It is for me and you. Unlike Amazon SageMaker Data Wrangler, which does the same type of data preparations, but it's very specifically targeted at machine learning use cases for data scientists who code. So that, once you get into it and it's under the SageMaker brand, so you can kind of assume it. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, like there's a machine learning data scientist who code named Steven. Like, how far down the differentiation path does it get?
Exactly. Whereas you can do a lot of the same things in both the products. It's just a question of what the UI is tailored like. So Data Brew is friendly to everybody. It's designed for no code action, but deliver the same results. And that's not clear just looking at the services. I spent an hour listening to 2 talks to figure out the differences between the two. That's not where you want to be as a company offering 300 plus services that it takes an hour to figure out which one you need.
Exactly. And every time I talk to customers, the reason that people sign up for my newsletter, and there is so it's for the snark and my great takes and sense of humor, right? No, we think you're a jackass. The reason we sign up for this is so that we have a rough idea of what's coming out that's relevant to us, because no one can read all the formal announcements. And yeah, it hurts, but I take that one on the chin.
Yeah, well, I mean, that even comes back to the infrastructure keynote today, where we were, you mentioned Nitro. The next thing that we started to look at or got talked about, Peter talked about in the Silicon, was he mentioned Inferentia and Trainium, which I know you have opinions on as far as the naming goes. But then he started talking about Graviton.
Yeah, no, sorry, please continue. I'll snark later.
I was going to say, I wound him up. That's one thing I promised myself I wouldn't do. I would not wind Corey up. But
it's impossible. All you're doing is mentioning AWS service names. That's all it takes.
Yeah, fair. So the point is, though, is that what he came up with these 3, he didn't dive too far into them other than to mention that they were efforts under the custom silicon umbrella. But the interesting thing about all 3 of these was that they move the needle forward, but they're seeing big boosts on the basically performance per watt, which is relating to the customer as performance for dollars, because we're getting more bang for our buck. But for AWS, it ties into that bigger sustainability story. But what I found really, really interesting, especially given that the whole keynote kicked off with an Intel ad, was that this was a huge push away from the sort of the stock Intel CPUs. Now they have millions of these things. They're not getting out of that business anytime soon. They'll still be a massive Intel customer, but it's showing this big push, and it ties back even to the Mac Minis, that custom silicone is really ruling the day because it's tailored to what you're doing at that time. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm terrified that someone is going to be at that $50 million company calling up foundries asking if they can make their own custom chips. But that's customers are going to customer. You can't ever get away from that. On some level, it's awesome. And on other levels, I don't actually care. Back when Graviton 2 had been announced in preview, I got access to one and started doing all of my development on it. And I think I hit 2 roadblocks for everything that I do. And they both got fixed within hours when I wound up flagging the respective projects around it. And that was it. And that goes double for the managed services. If RDS runs on top of Graviton 2 versus Intel, I could not possibly care less. What I care about is, am I getting the performance I need and at a price I can pay? And is it running my SQL the way I would expect it to? And I don't really care about what's under the hood because I don't have to care. On some level, we're starting to get away from that and becoming much more agnostic. Now, some people will care, some people have to, and I'm not disputing that, but the vast majority of customers don't. And it just becomes about hitting a certain price performance target now.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I think it's fantastic that we don't have to care. And I think the examples, I was really encouraged, despite the name, when they went into Trainium, right? Another custom machine learning chip. Because we know when you build hardware, when you build silicone to solve specific problems, you see a huge performance boost, which, in AWS's way essentially means it's going to be cheaper for us, right? It's going to save them energy. They're going to pass on savings for me, so it's going to cost me less. I fully expect them to start doing, maybe media decoding, given the elemental and media services that they do. I wouldn't be surprised to see a chip coming out there at some point. And again, more and more of these specific things that are solving the problems. And it's funny that you mentioned, the $50 million customer going out and building their own chip. You can kind of do that already with the AWS FPGA service. But very quickly you realize how hard that is and stop going down that path.
Yeah, you have to be at a certain point of scale in the billions to be able to build your own custom silicon sensibly. And then you get the best part of it, which is giving it a stupid name at the end of it. I used to think that the sound of your child in pain was the worst sound you'd ever hear, and then I heard about Amazon Trainium as a chip name. I love the fact that they're building a custom thing aimed at workloads. Even if it's nutty, that's fine. I know I'm an ML skeptic, that's okay. But I just can't get past the name. I think it's fantastic they're willing to do it. I think it opens up bright possibilities for the future, depending upon where they go next with this. But oh my God, it hurts. It just hurts to hear the name.
The good news is you don't have to say it that often, except for in conversations like this. But Inferentia and Trainium, they don't even line up as a naming scheme, right? So at least some of the services that were named by engineers, when they're very specific, they work early, like AWS Systems Manager worked early, then went well off the rails, as you've been frequently quoted. With these chips, they get buried down. We don't have to worry about them until Peter's keynotes, which is good. I like stuff I don't have to worry about that makes my life better by being either cheaper or more effective.
Oh, absolutely. And getting the NFL on as a reference customer, talking about a lot of the Graviton 2 stuff. One, you can tell they're very proud of that reference customer. I get it. It's absolutely a household name. It's likewise great, like when we talk about things like Moderna doing interesting stuff. But unfortunately, they are a household name now. They weren't a year ago. And to be perfectly honest, I really wish I'd never heard of them based upon this. But yeah, it's neat to see that there are real customers empowering a lot of that empower these use cases. The one thing I have never questioned has been that whenever AWS releases something nonsensical, and there's a lot of it, but it's very clear that they all have a series of customers who have not just decided, yeah, that'd be good, I'd pay for that, but who were clearly involved in building the thing out and talking to the service teams. I can levy an awful lot of criticism at AWS, and I do, but it is abundantly clear that they're not building services in a vacuum. except when they work with
Yeah.
serverless and Ben Kehoe and iRobot, in which case they are literally building services in a vacuum.
Fair. And, as we've learned, that vacuum will take over the world shortly, especially given all the new power, available through some of these custom silicone chips. But and I agree. I've seen it time and time again. I've been involved with AWS building out some of this stuff, and it's a great way to work because you're building something that is actually, it is a good fit. There is demand for it. Again, that challenge is making everyone else aware of what that fit is supposed to be. But the NFL, I thought, was really interesting it was a great presentation. It's hard to hit those customer stories at the right level. You don't want to go too deep. You don't want to go too high. It was interesting because it was somewhat relatable. But I found there was less customer variance this year. So we saw Snap again. We saw NFL again. Those were also in the keynotes last week, which, AWS is millions of customers. Like we should see some different examples because I want to see some different solutions because that always, fires off something where I go, oh, okay, like that's similar to what I'm dealing with or somebody I know is dealing with.
Absolutely. And I do think that there is validity to this of having reference customers out there. It seems that some of the customer references got a little repetitive between sessions and keynotes, and that's awesome. The other side of that, though, is the thing I love about having the varied customer use cases is it shines a light on a service in a way that I might not get to view it through otherwise. Very often, my entire opinion of a service changes when I wind up, well, I don't understand this. I'll make fun of it on Twitter like a sensible, kind person would do. And then I get people who either are occasionally work at AWS and sometimes customers will wind up talking to me with the very polite, very corporate version of, now listen here, you little shit, and they'll explain to me exactly what the context of the service is. And that's great, and then it makes sense, and I can start telling that story more effectively. But if there's one thing that I've learned in basically 4 years of giving AWS grief, it's that if I don't understand something, it is a certainty that I am not the only person who doesn't get it. And by learning in public and learning in my case through being incredibly cutting and sarcastic, it can help other people. I'm thrilled to do it. I mean, again, I love the idea of the moron's journey. I'm the moron and we follow me as I go through exploring these new services. And wow, this finely precision iPad that you've created is a really crappy hammer. How do I wind up using this more effectively? Can you build it with maybe some reinforcement on the edges? And then I misuse it as a database, but that's neither here nor there.
And I searched the session catalog for you. I did not find Route 53 as a database as a talk. So you're either going to have to write it or I'm going to have to write it. We're going to have to get it out there somewhere. But, this came up in your talk yesterday with Forest, right? AWS Proton seems like a really bad fit until you realize it's not built for you who's, cutting edge CI/CD, all serverless, everything. It's built for large enterprises that have a very real cultural problem that can be solved by providing a tool that addresses that as opposed to ignoring it. So, I've shared your experience multiple times. I've seen it, firsthand of trying to figure out like, okay, at first glance, this doesn't make sense to me. Who's it built for? Where does it fit in? So I saw a talk yesterday about Amazon Personalize. I haven't really played with it that much, but I get the idea. But then it was a customer who was delivering online experiences for sporting teams. And, there were some challenges in the way the talk was delivered, but the core idea was like, oh, you're taking in all your information about your customer in order to not just recommend videos, but to, really customize your customer service level to that fan from start to finish. And, you've removed all the legwork required to do that. And I was, ding, lights are going off. And I'm like, I can see how insanely valuable that is. Whereas before I was kind of like, meh, I don't really care.
Yeah. Someone in the Twitch chat asked that if they're willing to relate the context of a service to me directly, why not relate that more widely so everyone can get informed without having to deal with me? I know. I wish I didn't have to deal with me either, but I'm trapped here. The honest answer is that they do. When they release something and my response is, I don't get it, and I talk to a team who worked on something, what invariably happens next is they think I was being sarcastic or trying to be funny. They're surprised to realize I didn't get it. We get into a conversation, and it turns out that they're too close to the thing that they built to understand how someone without that context would perceive it. And then, like clockwork, this customer stories shift. The way they talk about the service shifts, and it starts to explain that narrative far better. One thing that we're seeing this with right now is AWS Proton. where when that was announced, you had the Andy Jassy executive level view of an opinionated way to build serverless and containerized applications and deploy them to production. Cool, you have 6 services or so that do that now, great. I look at the blog post and it is mostly code samples of what they did. Okay, I need that, I'm going to get there, but there has to be something in the middle that explains what is an opinionated perspective? How do I work this in? When is my on-ramp for using this? And there are now tweet threads out there about this. I'm going to do an exploration with that whenever I can spare time. So, 2023. And I guarantee you're going to see better messaging around Proton. I like the team behind it. I like what I've seen of it so far. I don't fully understand where it starts and stops yet. And I'd be willing to bet a substantial amount that we're about to start seeing significant storytelling improvements on the service. But I think the better question on some level is, why didn't they wind up grabbing someone random in the halls at AWS, a completely unrelated team? And let me explain this to you, and you give me your unfettered feedback. Because it's what I do isn't magic. It's just I'm the only person who doesn't care if I come across as an idiot in public, because I was born without the part of my brain that experiences shame in any respect. So all I'm doing is, I feel like on some levels I point at the emperor has no clothes. And yeah, wow, it turned out that was a bit of a miss. I didn't understand that from the way it was articulated. And yes, people are moving super quickly, and it's a giant rush to get things out in time for reInvent. Why? God only knows. There's only 1 month a year in which we can release AWS services, and it basically kills everyone involved. But okay, fine. I don't pretend to understand corporate culture. Again, it gets better. Not just the services, but the documentation around the services and the narrative around when and how to use them.
Yeah, and this is going to sound maybe a bit pandering, but it's my experience. I've been working with AWS for almost a full decade at this point, and I've never seen a team that's not open to feedback, right? And I've seen that same experience where I've said like, hey, this doesn't make sense. What am I missing? Is this supposed to be explained this way? And they make those improvements, because it is best intentions, but we're seeing more and more overlap between services. So I think this is coming more to a head now, where it's really difficult. And I think, again, it was Forrest the other day who said, how do you introduce new people into the AWS cloud? Or even when a service like Amazon DevOps Guru comes out and gets announced, and immediately you've got, sort of the polarized sides where people are like, this is amazing. Others are, I don't need that. Whereas, if you don't need that, that's fine. Don't use it. I did a deep dive into the preview the other day and put out a video on it, and I had a really positive experience. There were some challenges, of course, of doing the initial analysis, but having a tool that spits out and says, hey, I found a problem. Here's what I think you should do about it. That's awesome, right? As long as the costs don't skyrocket, that's really useful for a lot of teams. It's not for every team, and I think that's where we kind of.
And this is the problem. I've seen this approach done before. And the challenge you always run into with things like DevOps Guru is it's super helpful to have a recommendation as long as the recommendation is on. We've seen this before, usually in the billing space is the easiest microcosm I've got, where hey, you should go ahead and turn off that instance. It's idle, and you look at it, and it's the DR site. And that's dumb. Why would I do that? Then it tells you to buy some RIs for that test cluster you're turning off in 2 days. Okay, that's dumb. Why would I do that? And after a few bum recommendations, people completely tune it out entirely. And they ignore things like, you have an idle cluster that's been living in Australia since the Stone Age. Do you need that? And why is it mining all the Bitcoin? And by the time it has the valuable finding, people become blind to they tune out, completely lose sight of the value because there have been too many false positives. It's the service that cries wolf. Now, some people want it to be extra chatty. Some people don't want to hear anything unless the world is ending. And how do you tune that appropriately? It's a very, very hard problem. It's easy for me to sit in the cheap seats and make fun of this. If they can crack that nut, I'm looking forward to it because a lot of tools have tried. No one ever has.
Yeah, and a good example of not quite cracking that nut is Amazon Guard Duty. It was released 4 or 5 years ago. It does the same kind of thing in the security space. It looks at a bunch of security metrics and says like, hey, I think this is a problem. But again, it's trying to evaluate risk without enough context. But the recommendation I always give people is the same, whether it's Amazon Guard Duty or DevOps Guru, is that this isn't the end all and be all. It's a helper. So there was a really great talk on incident management that Oren Nachman from AWS gave the other night, and it was talking about how they manage handling outages and service degradations with a distributed team. And one of the key takeaways I had from that was he said it's really important to establish sort of that first step that people need to take when responding to an incident, because that will at least get people moving as opposed to debating about what their first move should be. So if you look at it in that light and go, when DevOps Guru provides an insight and says, hey, I think you should look at the timeout on your Lambda, that's why this is happening, at least that's a first step to take, as opposed to just sitting there going, I don't know what the problem is. You can go and eliminate something, even if it's not the right thing. So I think if teams go into it with the right attitude, that this is going to help, it's not going to solve everything for me, but it's going to be of help and help shorten that time to resolution, then you're going to see value. But if you're relying on it just to do everything for you, you just got to remember, it's not called DevOps Wizard. It's not magic.
I heartily endorse everything you said and would add on to it that what I do now is I enable guard duty because A, it's gotten better, and B, it rolls up into Amazon Detective, which winds up providing an awful lot of more cleaning out nonsense and being much more opinionated on this. My single greatest problem with Amazon Detective is that they haven't done a film noir style story about the Amazon Detective in the case of the, bumbling Lambda or something. There's got to be something out there that would be fun and engaging, but so far no luck. If you've written one, please reach out.
I think if we talk to Steve Schmidt, we might be able to get that done. I think I know enough people in the AWS security org, we might be able to get that rolling.
Absolutely. The alternative for them really is that I'm going to write it myself, and absolutely no one wants that.
That is probably the number one thing you could do to motivate any AWS team. That's probably the internal threat. You're like the AWS boogeyman. Hey, if you don't do this, we're calling Corey and he's going to talk about it.
And he's going to tweet about it, and you know what that unlocks. Yeah, I hope not, but probably. Last thing they talked about during the keynote before they wound up putting Peter DeSantis back in his data center cage was the sustainability efforts that AWS has undergone. And that's super interesting. They talked about the power stuff, they talked about concrete, and they talked about battling an invasive species in Cape Town, South Africa, presumably by signing up all the members of those invasive species to the partner program and then proceeding to kill them as a result. But that's just a guess. What was your take on the sustainability angle?
Yeah, I thought it was really good. The challenge with that is not a lot of people deal with those numbers. So when they come out and say, we're using over 3,000 megawatts of sustainable energy in a year, we've committed to 6,000. They say that's good. Is it good? Turns out it's really good, which is nice. It's good to see that effort. I was surprised that they have a water team. That was literally, I just went, what? You have a water team? But to see them thinking about this kind of thing. So in the case of the water, they reuse the chilling, the water that they use in the chillers in the data center 4 times within the data center before pushing 96% of it back out into the local community for irrigation because it's clean water. That kind of thing is really positive, especially because these availability zones and regions are popping up. They're not in cities; they're out in smaller communities. They have a disproportionate impact locally, and they have a huge impact globally. So the fact that AWS is thinking about this, is pushing things forward, like the climate pledge, where they said they've got 31 companies pushed to it, where they're going to meet the Paris Climate Agreement targets 10 years beforehand. This is all really, really positive stuff. The more they can do it, the better. The more they get other companies on board, the better. It kind of wandered off the rails with the cement bit. I followed that, but I think it was all just so that
like
Peter
he knows way more about cement than the average bear and doesn't realize it.
Yeah, when you pull out a word like cementitious, you're probably too far down that rabbit hole.
A little bit, yeah. And again, the problem that Amazon has with this, I am sympathetic to, because they wind up doing all these things with water and it gets mentioned in a keynote, but there's going to be very few tech press articles about this. Whereas if they didn't do this, it shows up on the front page of the New York Times, old-timey style, like local robber baron poisons local watering hole. And it becomes this giant corporate scandal. But instead, by doing the responsible thing early on, by getting this right, by learning from this, it's a footnote, and I think that's unfortunate because stuff like this isn't cheap, and stuff like this isn't stuff that they, strictly speaking, have to do. There was no court injunction forcing them to do this. I know because I follow the King County docket and anything Amazon based, I'll see. But it's not something that they're being forced into doing in any realistic sense. They're doing it from taking a long-term view. And I know I'll periodically get called out for shilling for Amazon whenever I say something nice about them, usually in the same breath as I'm insulting them, but that's the internet for you. And it's just unfortunate. I think of all the things they do, this is important to watch. They are, by some measures, according to Paul Johnson, who is sort of my go-to cloud climate person, behind some of the sustainability efforts from Google and Microsoft. I'm curious to see how this continues to evolve. I think that is an area I absolutely want competition in. I want them to beat the crap out of each other on those numbers because it's going to accelerate the entire industry forward faster.
Yeah, and I wholeheartedly agree with everything you said, and absolutely recommend that everybody watching follows Paul on Twitter. Ton of great information on sustainability and everything cloud. Really smart guy. But it's interesting your perspective on the getting called out for not doing it, which is absolutely what happens. But in an ideal world, I know fully well that we don't live in one. I'm not that Canadian, but that should be the norm. Is that everybody does these efforts, and it's just the status quo. It isn't today, and so AWS calling it out is a really positive thing. It's similar to the fact that Apple always calls out sustainability in everything that they do. I love seeing that. I love seeing any effort, anything interesting. The thing I found really unique, which again won't get as much credit as it should, was how deep into the technology and deep into the engineering solutions that Peter went. Normally what you get from companies disclosing sustainability is some stats, some mention of rare minerals,
and the consulting answer
quotes
as well of we're closer than ever. Cool. It sounds positive. It's uplifting. It's completely meaningless. You can say it at any point. You ever have to give, whenever someone asks you for a status of something and you don't have an answer, we're closer than ever is going to leave them reassured and you off the hook because you committed to absolutely nothing.
Yes, but you've shown movement. You're closer. That implies you weren't as close at some point.
Yes. Someone asked, is it a lot of this shared publicly? And they give a link to the AWS page. Maybe it is now. A couple months ago, they took down some of their sustainability stuff and the new stuff had not been posted. And Paul caught them on this. And what's the deal here? One of the things I like to do, and maybe this is, again, I don't run a whole lot of infrastructure, but I bias for US West too. It's one of the regions that is entirely powered by sustainable energy. And not every region is. So given the choice, I will bias for stuff like that. I think companies are going to be demonstrating similar points of awareness. They sort of beat the point into death on the keynote that, yeah, an AWS data center is more efficient than your corporate data center. That $50 million company is, of course, now out investing in all kinds of other things that they can beat Amazon at their own game. But fine, it makes perfect sense. Then we talk about how much machine learning training jobs take and how much compute it takes, and we're back down the rabbit hole of an arms race. But I at least like seeing it going in the right direction.
Yeah, well, we know that compute requirements are only going to increase. So that's one of my favorite things I love seeing in this custom silicon all around, not just in AWS, but AWS is certainly making huge strides. Is that that's more efficient per watt, right? So we're getting more bang for our buck from an energy perspective, which is a win not just from a data center engineering challenge, but from a sustainability one as well. So the more that we push that forward, the better off we are. I would love to see it just a little more in your face. So that thing about US West being powered by sustainable energy, that's fantastic. That should be made more obvious to people so that they can make that choice and sort of vote with their dollars. Because some of the challenges is that the numbers quoted today were committed targets, and it's a question of is that real? When does that become real? And we know that this is big. So there was a big kerfuffle this week and last week at one of the other competitors around exactly that, how much machine learning models take, how much energy they consume, and how sustainable they are to train at scale. Because it's an insane amount of computational power, which is a crazy amount of energy. And we know that, globally, this is a huge challenge that we need to address. We can't just keep consuming nonstop. We need to make smarter choices. So anything we can see on the engineering side that increases efficiency, increases the sustainability of the energy we're consuming, that's a huge win all around. So, kudos to AWS for doing this. Hopefully we're going to continue to see these improvements. Nerd me would love to see a little more deep dive into the technical side, just out of pure curiosity.
Yeah, and I say that if they need a slight bit more motivation, I'm prepared to even go one step further, and I will grant them a dispensation to give their climate efforts the dumbest name an AWS service namer can possibly come up with my blessing. If you want help, I'll pitch in.
That is a huge offer. I
Isn't it?
wholeheartedly endorse that. I think AWS should jump on that. Jeff, if you're watching, Andy, Werner, if you're watching, this is an unprecedented offer. You should absolutely jump on.
And Jeff just chimed in, send us some names. Challenge accepted. And people already are. Amazon Power Harvester. I like that quite a bit. Sounds like something I accidentally bought from Amazon Basics once. Okay, I think we're coming to the top of the hour. Mark, thank you so much for joining me today and suffering my slings, arrows, and occasional compliments. If people want to learn more about who you are, what you do, why you do it, and just how nice of a Canadian you really are, where can they find you?
You can hit me up on Twitter at MarkNCA or on my website, markn.ca. We've been tweeting back and forth online all the last couple weeks, so they'll stumble across me one way or the other. I'm always happy to have a chat, and thank you very much for having me on. This has been an absolute blast.
Thank you, Mark. A pleasure.